I always hear people misquote First John chapter 1, verse 8 and 9, because people people don't understand verse 8 because it's the same thing that Paul is saying in Romans chapter 7. After he describes the law and how it has power over a person as long as they live, you know, but we're dead to the law by the body of Christ. And the reason for that is because the law is sin's strength, as 1 Corinthians 15:56 says. The sting of death is sin, but the strength of sin is the law. I mean, this is the same thing Paul was saying in Romans 8:15 when he says, "Know you not to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants you are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or obedience unto righteousness." I mean, which is the same thing Jesus is saying in John 8:31 through 36. If you're truly my disciples, you will continue in my sayings, my teachings, my word. He says, and if you do, he says, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Jews thought he was talking about servitude to man, but Jesus said, he who commits sin is the servant of sin, the slave of sin. But a servant doesn't remain in the house forever, but a son does. The King James rendered it as the son, but it's talking about a son because he's making a contract between a slave and a son. And then he says in verse 36, but whoever the son shall make free shall be free indeed, which is the same thing Paul was getting at in Galatians chapter 4 when he talks about an heir, as long as he's a child, differs nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. He said, likewise, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. And he describes how the law is our schoolmaster in chapter 3. But here he says, likewise we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world, until the fullness of time came when God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made unto the law, that he might redeem us who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because we are sons and no longer servants, he's sent forth the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. I mean, we need to understand, the cleansing from all unrighteousness in verse 9 of 1 John chapter 1 is that he takes away our sin, as John describes in that same letter. Because he who commits sin, that Greek word is talking about coming into agreement with it and fulfilling it. Because we got to understand, whatsoever is not of faith is sin, as Paul wrote in Romans 14:23. And the righteousness of God is revealed from faith unto faith. It is written, the just shall live by faith.